I have left my husband and filed for divorce. I am starting to think that it's not so bad and that I will be all right. I suppose I should start with a bit of background on myself and my marriage. My husband and I met in college and quickly fell in love. He was charming, handsome, and made me laugh like no one else could. We got married soon after graduation and settled into our careers. For the first few years, everything seemed perfect. We bought a house, started talking about having kids, and envisioned a long, happy life together. But then, little by little, things started to change. He became distant, working longer hours and spending less time with me. Arguments became more frequent, usually over trivial matters. I tried to talk to him about it, but he always brushed me off, saying he was just stressed with work. I wanted to believe him, so I let it go. Then I got pregnant with our son. I thought this would bring us closer together, that the joy of starting a family would reignite the spark in our marriage. And for a while it did. He was attentive during my pregnancy, going to every doctor's appointment and eagerly preparing the nursery. When our son was born, he was an amazing father, doting on our little boy and sharing in all the sleepless nights and diaper changes. But as the months went by, he started to pull away again. He was spending more and more time at the office, missing dinner and bedtime with our son. When he was home, he was distracted, always on his phone or laptop. I tried to talk to him again, but this time he got defensive, accusing me of being needy and not understanding the demands of his job. I started to feel like I was living with a stranger. The man I had fallen in love with, the man I had pledged my life to, seemed to have disappeared. In his place was someone cold and distant, someone who made me feel like I was a burden rather than a partner. It was around this time that I started to suspect he was having an affair. There were little things at first. A mysterious text message, a late-night work emergency that didn't quite add up. I didn't want to believe it. Couldn't bring myself to confront him. I told myself I was being paranoid, that he would never do that to me, to our family. But the suspicions gnawed at me, keeping me up at night, making it hard to breathe. I felt like I was drowning, suffocating under the weight of my own doubts and fears. Something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this. Couldn't keep pretending everything was okay when it so clearly wasn't. That's when I made the decision. I was going to leave him. I was going to take our son and start a new life, free from the lies and the heartbreak. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. For my sanity, for my happiness, for the future I wanted for myself and my child. I started planning my escape, quietly putting money aside, looking for a place to live. I knew I had to be careful, had to do this right. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope, a sense of purpose. I was taking control of my life, and nothing was going to stop me. The decision to leave my husband didn't come easily. It was a gradual realization, a slow awakening to the fact that I was deeply unhappy in my marriage. For a long time, I tried to convince myself that things would get better, that we could work through our issues. I didn't want to admit defeat, didn't want to face the reality that the man I loved had become a stranger to me. But as the months went by, I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. I was miserable, and no amount of hoping or wishing was going to change that. I realized that I deserved better, that my son deserved better. We deserved a life free from the constant tension and heartache, a life where we could be happy and loved unconditionally. Once I made the decision to leave, I knew I had to be strategic. I couldn't just walk out the door with our son and never look back. I needed a plan, a way to ensure that we would be safe and provided for. I started by putting money aside, a little bit at a time so my husband wouldn't notice. I opened a separate bank account in my name and started funneling funds into it whenever I could. Next, I began looking for a place to live. I knew I couldn't stay in our family home, not with all the memories and the constant reminder of my failed marriage. I wanted a fresh start, a place that was just mine and my son's. I started browsing rental listings online, trying to find something that was affordable and in a good neighborhood. It wasn't easy keeping all of this from my husband. I had to be careful not to leave any evidence of my plans lying around. I started staying up late at night, waiting until he was asleep to do my research and make my arrangements. I felt like a spy in my own home, constantly on edge and worried that he would discover what I was up to. But as I continued to plan and prepare, I started to feel a sense of empowerment. For the first time in a long time, I was taking control of my life. I was making decisions for myself and my son, rather than simply going along with what my husband wanted. It was scary and exhilarating all at once. I knew that leaving wouldn't be easy. I knew there would be challenges and obstacles to overcome. But I also knew that it was the right thing to do. I couldn't keep living a lie. Couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it so clearly wasn't. I needed to be true to myself, to my own happiness and well-being. As I continued to plan and save, I started to feel a sense of hope for the future. I could picture myself and my son in our new home, starting fresh and building a life that was truly our own. I could imagine waking up each day feeling content and at peace, rather than anxious and unhappy. I knew it would take time and effort to get there, but I was ready for the journey. I was ready to leave behind the pain and heartache of my marriage and embrace a new chapter in my life. I was ready to be the kind of mother and woman I knew I could be, free from the constraints and disappointments of the past. With each passing day, my resolve grew stronger. I was going to do this. I was going to leave my husband and start anew. And nothing Not even the fear and uncertainty that sometimes crept in was going to stop me. The day I served my husband the divorce papers was one of the hardest days of my life. I had been planning this moment for weeks, going over what I would say and how I would say it. But no amount of preparation could have fully readied me for the reality of confronting him with my decision. I waited until our son was at school, not wanting him to witness what I knew would be a difficult and emotional conversation. My hands shook as I handed my husband the envelope containing the papers, my heart pounding in my chest. "We need to talk," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me with confusion and concern, clearly not understanding what was happening. "What's this?" he asked, gesturing to the envelope. "Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I needed to say. "No, everything is not okay," I began. "I'm not happy, and I haven't been for a long time. I've tried to make this work, but I can't do it anymore. I want a divorce." The words hung heavy in the air between us, the silence deafening. For a moment, he just stared at me, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. "What are you talking about?" he finally said, his voice rising in pitch. "A divorce? Where is this coming from?" I could see the anger and hurt in his eyes, and part of me wanted to take it all back, to tell him that I didn't mean it and that we could work things out. But I knew that wasn't true. I had made my decision and I needed to stand by it. "This isn't a sudden thing," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been unhappy for a long time and I've tried to talk to you about it. But nothing has changed. I can't keep living like this. Not for myself and not for our son." He shook his head, still not wanting to believe what I was saying. "Is there someone else?" he asked, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "Is that what this is about?" I felt a surge of anger at his accusation. "No, there isn't someone else," I said firmly. "This is about me and my own happiness. I found a new place to live, and I think it's best if we go our separate ways." He looked at me like I was a stranger, like he couldn't reconcile the woman standing before him with the wife he thought he knew. "I can't believe this," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "You're just going to leave just like that? What about our son? What about our life together?" I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I blinked them back, determined to stay strong. "I'm doing this for our son," I said softly. "He deserves a happy and stable home, and I don't think we can provide that for him together. As for our life together, I think we both know it hasn't been working for a long time." He slumped down into a chair, looking defeated. "I don't understand," he said, his voice barely audible. "I thought we were happy. I thought everything was fine." I felt a pang of sympathy for him, knowing that this was a shock and a blow. But I also knew that I couldn't let his reaction sway me from my course. "I'm sorry," I said gently, "but this is what I need to do. I hope that we can find a way to co-parent our son and maintain a civil relationship, but I can't be your wife anymore." He didn't say anything, just stared down at the floor, the divorce papers crumpled in his hand. I knew there would be more conversations to come, more details to work out. But for now, I had said what I needed to say. I had taken the first step towards my new life, and there was no turning back. The day I moved out of our family home was bittersweet. On one hand, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief and freedom, knowing that I was finally taking control of my life and my happiness. On the other hand, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness and nostalgia as I packed up my belongings and said goodbye to the place that had been my home for so many years. But despite the mixed emotions, I knew I was making the right decision. As I loaded the last of my boxes into the moving truck and took one final look around the empty house, I felt a sense of closure and finality. This chapter of my life was coming to an end, but a new one was just beginning. The first few weeks in my new place were an adjustment, to say the least. It was strange waking up in a different bed, in a different room, without the familiar sounds and routines of my old life. But as I settled in and started to make the space my own, I began to feel a sense of peace and contentment that I hadn't experienced in a long time. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. I no longer had to walk on eggshells around my husband, constantly worried about saying or doing the wrong thing. I could make my own decisions and live my life on my own terms, without the weight of his expectations and criticisms bearing down on me. Of course, it wasn't all easy. There were moments of loneliness and doubt, times when I questioned whether I had made the right choice. But whenever those feelings crept in, I reminded myself of why I had left in the first place. I thought about my son and the kind of life I wanted for him, the kind of example I wanted to set. And I knew that staying in an unhappy and unhealthy marriage was not the answer. Slowly but surely, I started to build a new life for myself and my son. I found a job that I loved, one that allowed me to use my skills and passions in a meaningful way. I made new friends, people who supported and encouraged me in my journey. And I started to rediscover the things that brought me joy and fulfillment, hobbies and interests that had fallen by the wayside in the midst of my marital troubles. As the weeks turned into months, I started to feel like a different person. I was more confident, more self-assured, more in touch with my own needs and desires. I no longer felt like I was living someone else's life, but rather creating a life that was truly my own. Of course, there were still challenges and obstacles to overcome. Co-parenting with my ex-husband was not always easy, and there were times when we butted heads and struggled to find common ground. But we both knew that our son's well-being had to come first, and we worked hard to maintain a civil and cooperative relationship for his sake. And then there were the moments of doubt and fear, the times when I wondered if I was strong enough to do this on my own. But I quickly learned that I was stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. I had survived the pain and heartbreak of a failing marriage, and I had come out the other side a better and more resilient person. As I looked around my new home, at the life I had created for myself and my son, I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. It hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead, but I knew that I had made the right decision, and that I was exactly where I needed to be. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful and excited for the future. I knew that there would be ups and downs, triumphs and setbacks. But I also knew that I had the strength and the courage to face whatever lay ahead. I was ready for this new chapter, ready to embrace all the possibilities and opportunities that it held. Telling our families about the divorce was almost as difficult as telling my husband. I knew that the news would come as a shock to everyone, and I dreaded the conversations that lay ahead. But I also knew that I couldn't keep this a secret forever, and that it was better to be honest and upfront about what was happening. I decided to tell my parents first. I invited them over for coffee one afternoon, my stomach in knots as I waited for them to arrive. When they walked through the door, I could see the concern on their faces, the worry in their eyes. They knew something was wrong even before I said a word. I took a deep breath and told them everything, from the early days of my marriage to the moment I had handed my husband the divorce papers. I told them about the loneliness and the heartache, the feeling of being stuck in a life that no longer fit. And I told them about my decision to leave, to start fresh and build a new life for myself and my son. To my surprise, they were more understanding than I could have ever hoped for. They listened without judgment, offering words of support and encouragement. They told me that they loved me no matter what, and that they would stand by me through this difficult time. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, knowing that I had their backing and their love. Telling my in-laws was a bit more complicated. I knew that they would be devastated by the news, and that they would likely take my husband's side in the split. But I also knew that I needed to maintain a cordial relationship with them for the sake of my son, who loved his grandparents dearly. I decided to break the news to them over the phone, not wanting to do it in person. I kept the conversation brief and to the point, explaining that my husband and I had decided to divorce and that I had moved out of our family home. I could hear the shock and disbelief in their voices, the pain and the anger. But I also heard a glimmer of understanding, a recognition that things had not been right between us for a long time. In the weeks and months that followed, I worked hard to maintain a civil and respectful relationship with my in-laws. I made sure that they had plenty of time with their grandson, and I always spoke positively about them in front of my son. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments when the tension and the hurt feelings threatened to boil over. But I knew that it was important for my son to have a relationship with his grandparents, and I was willing to put in the effort to make that happen. As time passed, I started to see a shift in my relationships with both my own family and my in-laws. My parents became my biggest champions, always there to offer a listening ear or a helping hand. They were proud of me for having the courage to leave an unhappy situation, and they marveled at the strength and resilience I showed in the face of such a difficult time. My in-laws, too, started to come around. They began to see that the divorce was not a personal attack on them or their son, but rather a necessary step for me to find happiness and fulfillment. They started to treat me with more kindness and respect, and they even began to acknowledge the role that their son had played in the demise of our marriage. It wasn't always easy, navigating these complex family dynamics in the midst of such a major life change. But I knew that I was doing the best I could, and that I was setting a positive example for my son. I wanted him to see that it was possible to maintain healthy and respectful relationships, even in the face of conflict and hurt feelings. And as I looked around at the support system I had built for myself, at the love and understanding I had found from my family and friends, I felt a sense of gratitude and appreciation wash over me. I knew that I was not alone in this journey, and that I had the strength and the resources to weather whatever storms lay ahead. About 2 months after I moved out, I received a call from my mother-in-law that would once again turn my world upside down. She had asked to meet me for lunch, saying that she had something important to discuss. I agreed, thinking that perhaps she wanted to talk about our son or the upcoming holidays. But as soon as we sat down at the restaurant, I could tell that something was off. She seemed nervous and uncomfortable, fidgeting with her napkin and avoiding eye contact. Finally, she took a deep breath and blurted out the news that would shake me to my core. "I thought you should know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Your husband has started seeing someone new, a woman named Karen." For a moment, I felt like I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to spin around me, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I had suspected that my husband was having an affair, but to hear it confirmed out loud was a blow that I wasn't fully prepared for. But as the initial shock wore off, I realized that I wasn't as surprised as I thought I would be. The signs had been there for a long time, the late nights at the office and the secret phone calls. I had just chosen to ignore them, hoping that if I didn't acknowledge the truth, it wouldn't be real. I took a sip of water, trying to compose myself before I spoke. "Thank you for telling me," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I appreciate your honesty." My mother-in-law looked at me with a mixture of surprise and confusion. "You don't seem very upset," she said, her brow furrowed. "Did you already know?" I shook my head. "No, I didn't know for sure, but I had my suspicions." She nodded, looking down at her plate. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I know this must be difficult for you." I could hear the sincerity in her voice, the genuine concern for my well-being. And in that moment, I realized that I had a choice. I could let this news destroy me, let it consume me with anger and bitterness. Or I could rise above it, focus on my own healing and happiness. I chose the latter. "It is difficult," I acknowledged. "But to be honest, it's not entirely unexpected. Our marriage had been struggling for a long time, and I think we both knew that it wasn't going to last." My mother-in-law looked at me with surprise, clearly not expecting such a composed response. "I had no idea things were that bad," she said. "I'm so sorry." I shook my head. "It's not your fault," I assured her. "And to be perfectly honest, your son's affair isn't new either. I've known about it for a while now." Her eyes widened in shock. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the revelation I was about to make. "He's been sleeping with her since I gave birth to our son," I said, my voice calm and matter-of-fact. "Maybe even before that." The color drained from my mother-in-law's face, and for a moment I thought she might faint. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. "I had no idea," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm so sorry. I can't believe he would do something like that." I reached across the table and took her hand in mine, giving it a gentle squeeze. "It's not your fault," I repeated. "And it's not mine either. Your son made his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences." She nodded, wiping away a stray tear. "I just can't believe it," she said. "I never would have thought he was capable of something like that." I smiled sadly. "Neither did I admitted. But sometimes people surprise us, and not always in a good way. The important thing is that we don't let their actions define us or control our lives." The revelation of my husband's affair with Karen sent shockwaves through our families. My in-laws, who had always seen their son as a model husband and father, were stunned and devastated by the news. They couldn't believe that he was capable of such betrayal and deceit, and they struggled to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the reality of his actions. For a while, there was a palpable tension between us all. My in-laws didn't quite know how to act around me, torn between their love for their son and their growing realization of the pain he had caused. They would alternate between awkward silences and overly cheerful attempts at conversation, never quite sure what to say or do. But as the weeks passed, I started to notice a shift in their behavior. They began to reach out to me more, offering words of support and encouragement. They would ask about my well-being and offer to help in any way they could, whether it was watching my son for a few hours or simply lending a listening ear. I was touched by their kindness and understanding, knowing how difficult this situation must have been for them as well. They were grieving the loss of the family they thought they had, the image of their son as a loving and faithful husband. But they were also starting to see the truth of who he really was, and the damage he had caused. As for my husband, the revelation of his affair seemed to shake him to his core. At first he tried to deny it, claiming that it was all a misunderstanding and that he had never been unfaithful. But when confronted with the evidence, he finally broke down and admitted the truth. He begged for my forgiveness, claiming that the affair meant nothing and that he had never stopped loving me. He promised to change, to be a better husband and father, to do whatever it took to win me back. But his words rang hollow to me, empty promises that I had heard too many times before. I knew that I could never trust him again, never fully believe in his love or his commitment to our family. The betrayal was too deep, the hurt too profound. And even if I could forgive him, I knew that I could never forget what he had done. So I stood my ground, firm in my decision to move forward with the divorce. I told him that I appreciated his apologies, but that they didn't change the reality of our situation. We were better off apart, free to build new lives and find happiness on our own terms. He didn't take the news well, oscillating between anger and despair. He would lash out at me one moment, accusing me of giving up on our marriage too easily, and then break down in tears the next, begging me to reconsider. It was a painful and emotionally draining time for us both, as we navigated the end of our life together. But through it all, I remained steadfast in my resolve. I knew that I was making the right decision for myself and for my son, even if it was the hardest thing I had ever done. I had spent too many years in an unhappy and unfulfilling marriage, and I was ready to start a new chapter on my own terms. As the divorce proceedings began, I braced myself for the challenges that lay ahead. I knew that there would be difficult conversations and painful compromises, that we would have to find a way to co-parent our son and divide our shared life. But I also knew that I was strong enough to handle whatever came my way, that I had the love and support of my family and friends to see me through. And so I faced the future with a mixture of trepidation and hope, knowing that while the road ahead would not be easy, it was a path I had chosen for myself. A path towards healing, towards happiness, towards a life that was truly my own. In the midst of the chaos and upheaval of my divorce, I found myself grappling with a complex web of emotions. On one hand, I was relieved to be free from the constant tension and unhappiness of my marriage, to have the chance to start fresh and build a life that was truly my own. But on the other hand, I couldn't shake the lingering love and attachment I felt towards my husband, the man I had once promised to spend my life with. It was a strange and unsettling feeling, to be so hurt and betrayed by someone and yet still feel a deep connection to them. I would catch myself thinking about the good times we had shared, the moments of laughter and joy that had once filled our lives. And then I would remember the lies, the betrayal, the months and years of neglect and emotional distance, and the pain would come rushing back. I knew that I needed to focus on my own healing and growth, to let go of the past and embrace the future that lay ahead. But it was easier said than done, and there were days when the hurt and the anger threatened to consume me. I found solace in therapy, in the quiet moments of self-reflection and introspection. I worked with a counselor to process my feelings and develop coping strategies, to learn how to trust myself and my own instincts again. It was a slow and often painful process, but gradually I started to feel a shift within myself. I began to rediscover the parts of me that had been lost or buried during my marriage, the interests and passions that had fallen by the wayside. I started taking dance classes again, something I had loved as a child but had given up when life got too busy. I volunteered at a local animal shelter, finding joy and purpose in caring for the abandoned and neglected creatures that society had forgotten. And slowly but surely, I started to build a new life for myself and my son. I found a job that I loved, one that challenged me and allowed me to use my skills in meaningful ways. I made new friends, people who supported and encouraged me in my journey of self-discovery and growth. And I started to envision a future that was bright and full of possibility, one where I was the master of my own destiny. Of course, there were still moments of doubt and fear, times when the old wounds would reopen and the pain would come flooding back. I would see my ex-husband at our son's school events or family gatherings, and the sight of him would stir up a complex mix of emotions: anger, sadness, regret, and yes, even a flicker of love. But I learned to acknowledge those feelings without letting them control me, to recognize them as a natural part of the healing process. I knew that I couldn't erase the past or change what had happened, but I could choose how I moved forward and what kind of life I wanted to create for myself. And so I focused on my own growth and development, on becoming the best version of myself that I could be. I read books and attended workshops, learning about mindfulness and self-care and the power of positive thinking. I surrounded myself with people who lifted me up and inspired me to be better, who reminded me of my own strength and resilience. It wasn't always easy, and there were days when I felt like giving up, when the weight of my past threatened to crush me. But I refused to let it define me, to let it hold me back from the life I knew I deserved. And as I looked to the future, I felt a sense of hope and excitement stirring within me. I knew that there would be challenges and obstacles ahead, that the road to healing and happiness was not always smooth or straightforward. But I also knew that I had the tools and the support I needed to navigate whatever lay ahead, to build a life that was rich and fulfilling and true to who I was. I was ready to embrace this new chapter, to step boldly into the unknown and trust in the journey that lay ahead. And I knew that no matter what happened, I would always have the love and strength within myself to carry me through. As the divorce proceedings began in earnest, I braced myself for the challenges that lay ahead. I knew that ending a marriage was never easy, even under the best of circumstances. And given the complex web of emotions and history between my husband and me, I anticipated that the process would be particularly difficult and fraught. At first, my husband seemed to accept the reality of our situation, agreeing to move forward with the divorce and work towards a fair and equitable settlement. But as the weeks passed and the reality of our separation began to sink in, I noticed a shift in his behavior. He started to drag his feet on paperwork and negotiations, finding excuses to delay or postpone important meetings and deadlines. He would nitpick over minor details and disagreements, turning even the simplest of discussions into drawn-out battles. It was as if he was trying to slow down the process, to hold on to the remnants of our life together for as long as he could. At times, he would vacillate between acceptance and resistance, one moment agreeing to the terms of our divorce and the next moment threatening to fight me on every point. It was a roller coaster of emotions and negotiations, and there were days when I felt like I was banging my head against a wall, unable to make any progress or find any common ground. But through it all, I remained determined to see the divorce through, to stand my ground and fight for what I knew was right for myself and my son. I refused to be swayed by my husband's stalling tactics or emotional manipulation, knowing that giving in would only prolong the pain and uncertainty for us all. I worked closely with my lawyer to develop a strategy for moving forward, to ensure that my rights and interests were protected throughout the process. We drafted detailed proposals and counteroffers, laying out the terms of our separation in clear and unambiguous language. And when my husband pushed back or tried to muddy the waters, we stood firm and held our ground. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments when I felt like giving up, when the stress and the strain of the process threatened to overwhelm me. But I drew strength from the love and support of my family and friends, from the knowledge that I was doing what was best for myself and my child. And slowly but surely we started to make progress. My husband began to realize that his stalling tactics and resistance were only hurting himself in the long run, that the sooner we could reach a settlement and move on with our lives, the better off we would all be. We started to have more productive conversations and negotiations, working through the details of our separation with a newfound sense of cooperation and compromise. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of tension and disagreement, but we were moving forward, step by step, towards a resolution that we could both live with. As the final terms of our divorce were hammered out and the paperwork was signed, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It had been a long and difficult journey, filled with pain and heartache and uncertainty, but I had made it through to the other side, stronger and more resilient than I ever thought possible. I knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that co-parenting with my ex-husband and building a new life for myself and my son would come with its own set of challenges and obstacles. But I also knew that I was ready to face whatever lay ahead, that I had the strength and the determination to create a future that was bright and full of possibility. And so I looked to the horizon with a sense of hope and excitement, knowing that while the past could never be erased or forgotten, the future was mine to shape and mold as I saw fit. I was ready to embrace this new chapter, to step boldly into the unknown and trust in the journey that lay ahead. And I knew that no matter what happened, I would always have the love and strength within myself to carry me through. As I stood on the threshold of my new life, I couldn't help but feel a sense of uncertainty and trepidation. For so long, my identity had been tied to my role as a wife and mother, to the familiar rhythms and routines of my marriage. And now, as I faced the prospect of building a new future for myself and my son, I found myself wondering what that future might hold. There were so many unknowns, so many questions that kept me up at night. How would I balance work and single parenthood? How would my son adjust to the changes in our family dynamic? Would I ever find love again? Or had my husband's betrayal shattered my ability to trust and open my heart? But even in the midst of my doubts and fears, I knew that I had made the right decision. I had fought too hard and come too far to turn back now, to settle for a life that was less than I deserved. And I was determined to hold on to the newfound sense of independence and happiness that I had worked so hard to achieve. I knew that it wouldn't be easy, that there would be moments of loneliness and doubt, times when the weight of my responsibilities threatened to overwhelm me. But I also knew that I had the strength and the resilience to weather whatever storms lay ahead, to build a life that was rich and fulfilling and true to who I was. And so I focused on the things that brought me joy and purpose, the passions and pursuits that had been put on hold for far too long. I threw myself into my work, taking on new projects and challenges that pushed me out of my comfort zone and helped me grow both personally and professionally. I made time for hobbies and interests that had fallen by the wayside, rediscovering the things that made me feel alive and inspired. I also made a conscious effort to cultivate a strong network of support, surrounding myself with friends and family members who lifted me up and reminded me of my own worth and value. I joined a single parents group, finding solace and camaraderie in the shared experiences and struggles of other men and women who were navigating the same uncharted waters. And slowly but surely, I started to feel a sense of hope and excitement stirring within me. I realized that my divorce, painful as it had been, had also given me a precious gift, the opportunity to start anew, to create a life that was entirely my own. I knew that there would be challenges and setbacks along the way, that the road ahead would not always be smooth or easy. But I also knew that I had the tools and the strength to handle whatever came my way, to build a future that was bright and full of possibility. And so I looked to the horizon with a sense of determination and resolve, ready to embrace the unknown and trust in the journey that lay ahead. I knew that I might stumble and fall at times, that there would be moments of fear and uncertainty. But I also knew that I would always get back up again, that I would keep moving forward no matter what. Because I had fought too hard and come too far to settle for anything less than the life I deserved, the happiness and fulfillment that I knew were waiting for me on the other side. And I was ready to claim that life for myself, to step boldly into the future and make it my own. As I looked at my son, at the love and joy that shone in his eyes, I knew that I was doing this for him as much as for myself. I wanted to show him that it was possible to overcome even the darkest of trials, to build a life of purpose and meaning no matter what challenges we might face. And I knew that together we could weather any storm, that our love and our bond would always see us through. So I took a deep breath and squared my shoulders, ready to face whatever lay ahead with courage and grace. The future might be uncertain, but I knew that I had the strength and the determination to make it my own. And I knew that no matter what happened, I would always have the love and support of those who mattered most, the unshakable foundation that would always keep me standing tall.